There is no end to the delights that come from living around me, and one that will hit you in the face like a cream pie relatively soon after joining my company and repeatedly thereafter is the admonition that there is no alternative to the existential. What that means is that the world that exists is the only world that exists. This is the universe of real objects and real events that we perceive with our senses and respond accordingly. We can demonstrate that this is true in no end of ways, and I don't intend to do it now because it's utterly unnecessary. If you are in my presence and want to insist on some sort of unreality, I will throw ping pong balls at your head until you beg me to stop, and then we can all agree that the events are really happening, that my will is my own to control every disputation that you want to offer to the prior existence of existential reality. I will manage to take away from you in very short order, or you'll run away from me, one or the other. To live around me is to live in a private sphere within the universe in which the admonition that there is no alternative to the existential is an unstated given. It's understood that if you're going to be around me, you're not going to make contrafactual claims, not for long. And by contrafactual, I don't mean merely subjunctive. To say when grandma gets here is not an anti-reality statement if there really is a grandma and if she really is intending to come over. The contrafactual statements that will get you in trouble with me invariably consist of the empathy for the impossible. The empathy for the impossible. This is one of those unique characteristics that makes human beings human. It's a wonderful thing being human, but one of the wonderful things that comes along with being human is the ability to contrive the means of achieving our own destruction. Self-destruction is within the realm of possibility for human beings where it really isn't for any other organism. That behavior that seems to be self-destructive in other organisms is not in fact self-destructive because that organism has not abstracted the self. That organism does not understand the causal relationships that obtain in its behavior. It does what it does for the reasons that are pre-programmed in its genetics or burned into its mammal brain and snake brain circuitry by repeated bad experiences, or good experiences for that matter too. But it's all a matter of pattern matching and cargo cults and blah blah blah. We've gone into that before. We can go into it again, and we're not going to talk about it today, because the point that I want to get to today is that as a manifestation of there being no alternative to the existential, there is in fact no alternative to egoism as the moral philosophy that governs human behavior. I'm making a statement of ontology, not teleology. Egoism is understood to be a teleological argument, an argument about shoulding rather than being, but in fact, the nature of humanity as a type of organism, the nature of human beings as a manifestation, a further elaboration of the potential inherent in the genetic organism Homo sapiens, which is us, the wise men. The wisdom is acquired, it is not inborn. Our nature as Homo sapiens is inborn as a result of genetic recombination of strands of DNA and their further development. But the existence of human consciousness, the existence of the wisdom implied by sapiens, the existence of moral philosophy as such, of teleology as such, of philosophy as such, of all ideas, the existence of all of that is contingent upon the cultivation and maturation of the human brain, unique to Homo sapiens among organisms, and the nature of the control over every organism, but over human organisms specifically, is fundamentally egoistic. That I could use the term egoism to describe the internal operations of any organism, of every organism, but I'd be using it analogically because egoism is understood to be an abstract moral philosophy. It's understood to be something that could only be understood by human beings. And yet, every organism that exists and every organism that has ever existed is internally motivated, internally controlled, and is internally motivated in pursuit of its own values. This is true of all organisms, no exceptions, zero exceptions. The exception that the high seas in particular are racing to right now would be specialized species like ants, bees, termites, um, where members of that specialized species seem to be engaging in self-sacrificial behavior, but they're not. In fact, they're all working toward the common purpose of the hive. You can consider the hive as being a supraorganism, a scaled organism, as it were, but nevertheless, each individual separate member of that species is nevertheless internally controlled, internally motivated, and is pursuing its own values to the extent it doesn't understand any values, whatever. It can't understand value. This, again, requires the ability to think in abstractions, which we, unique among organisms, have. But nevertheless, every organism, including members of social species, specialized social species, every organism is pursuing its own values to the best of its ability, to the best of its capacity. And this would necessarily be true for us as well as organisms, were it not for the ability of the mind to pursue disvalues. Unlike every other organism, no other organism can pursue disvalues, because a disvalue, again, it's conceptual, but organisms don't pursue their own destruction, because if they did, they would cease to exist. That, in essence, the egoism that we can observe in all organisms is a matter of survivorship bias. That every organism that might have existed, potentially could have existed, that can be postulated to possibly have existed, again, a massive empathy for the impossible. We have zero evidence for this. This is strictly evidence-free conjecture. And again, when you hear people start to wax rhapsodic about things that seem really unlikely, look around for the impossibility, because it's there. You're listening to the empathy for the impossible. But if we could even postulate the existence of organisms who pursued their own destruction, they will have pursued their own destruction, either prior to reproducing or afterward. It doesn't really matter, because if they don't exist, they don't exist. Everything that we know of that exists in organic life pursues its own values relentlessly, obsessively, without cease, and when anti-cessation happens, it is immediately succeeded by death. That if your dog gets old enough, your dog gets to be 12 or 15 years old, he might splay out on the floor and cease to do anything in its own behalf, and that may be a total system failure, or it may be a failure of will, or it may be the two combined together. You tell me which, it doesn't really matter. When that dog stops acting in its own behalf, very soon thereafter it stops acting altogether. Whether or not you take it to the vet and deliver the coup de grace doesn't really matter. That dog will die in very short order because it stopped living. And this is true for us as well. We are internally motivated, self-controlled, and ideally focused on pursuing our true survival values, the values that we truly need in order to live and thrive as human beings, as Homo sapiens, in whom has been cultivated the thinking brain, in whom has been cultivated father tongue. Ideally, we should pursue those values. We don't have to. We can pursue disvalues instead. But nevertheless, there is no alternative to that self-motivation, to that self-control. There is no alternative to that existential reality that human lives are driven from the inside out and in no other way. There is no alternative to self-control. There is no alternative to self-motivation. And ultimately, there is no alternative to egoism, that insofar as you have convinced yourself you're pursuing some anegoistic motivation, nevertheless, you're breathing in, breathing out, you're ingesting food, digesting it, excreting it, you are keeping body and soul together. We have a cat here who's looking to start a civil war. This is a jihadi cat. We have to export her to a more favorable environment and then encourage her to proceed that way. By force of arms, you will note, because I can't communicate with her in words. I can only convey my thoughts to her by means of emphatic mother tongue demonstrations. But there is no alternative for human beings to self-control. It is a matter of teleology to go one step beyond that and to say that accordingly, respond accordingly. Another one you'll hear around here all the time, respond accordingly. Once we've discovered the true facts of the situation, the intelligent thing to do is respond accordingly. that when we discover that as a matter of ontology there is no alternative to exclusive self-control within a human life, as soon as we recognize that as a matter of ontology, then we can adopt egoism as an explicit teleology, that we can adopt rational self-interest. I don't intend to defend that either. I think that the defenders of so-called selfishness have done more harm than good by turning self-interest into atomism. If you care about this, read Man Alive. It's discussed in chapter 6, but the values that matter to a human life are quite a bit more important than getting the biggest piece of chocolate cake when you're 5 years old. And this ultimately is what defenders of egoism end up looking like. Even when they're not defending actual crime, they are defending really malicious kind of self-seeking in spite of the rational values that a full lifelong human life require. It is not a matter of self-sacrifice to look out for your children. It is not a matter of self-sacrifice to defend your wife and your children even at the expense of your own life. This is yourself that you are defending. This is what egoism actually means, is to defend all of your values even at the expense of your own life. That the story of Socrates is not a tragedy. That story of Socrates is a benedy. That is a very happy ending. Socrates got to be who he was to the very end. He never had to deny who he was, and he didn't even have to surrender to murder at someone else's hands. He lived his own way to the very end, and that's a benedy. That's the story of the self-triumphant. And that's why we know Socrates' name to this very day, not because his life was a tragedy, but because his life was a benedy. And it's a benedy that shows us how to live. Do your worst. I will not kneel. That's self-interest. That's egoism. That's egoism in action. And this is inescapable. This is our nature as organisms. Just as every other organism is pursuing its own values relentlessly, it is our nature to pursue our values relentlessly. That when we fail to do that, we are betraying our nature as things. Again, uniquely among organisms, the only organism that can betray its own interests is the human being. Not even the Homo sapiens can betray its own interests. You have to cultivate the mind and father tongue. You have to be able to think in abstractions in order to abstract frustration, to abstract failure, to abstract self-destruction. This requires the thinking brain. Can't be done without it. Yet another miracle of humanity. I mean, a sad miracle, a tragic miracle, but nevertheless unique to us. What makes us special? Do you want human exceptionalism? There it is. Everything of splendor, but also everything of squalor. Splendor and squalor are only possible to human beings. They're not possible to other organisms because they can't plan for them. They can't intend them. We fail as egoists, to the extent we are egoists. We fail by failing to be unashamedly egoists. I don't fail this way. I fail every other way, alas, but I do not fail to be proud to be an egoist. I am very proud to be an egoist all the time, very proud of the status of being a thriving human being, and I exude that in everything that I do. And I want everyone else to do this too, and the fact that we don't do it is why we are failing. Why our world is being taken from us is because we won't defend it. We will not defend what we are. We don't have to defend what we have. If we defend what we are, we're defending what we have. But we will not defend what we have if we won't defend what we are, and if we will not be unashamedly egoists, then the enemies of egoism will take what they want from us because they know we won't defend it. They know we won't defend what matters most to us. What we say matters most to us. I've been thinking about this in all kinds of different ways. I think about it in terms of the things that I write, obviously, and the things that I write about writing. But I've been thinking about it as real-world practical exercises. I've talked before about married couples should be going to the shooting range whenever they can. It's a wonderful date night. But I think everyone who believes in the right to self-defense, especially the right to self-defense by firearm, should be taking friends to the shooting range. Not, you don't have to do it all the time, but maybe once a month or so, take a stranger, someone that you have never taken before, but you know this person and you want them to understand why you think it's important to be able to defend your own life. And take them with you to the shooting range and rent them a 38 or a 1911, pay the ammunition, shoot together, talk about what you're doing, show them what to do, help them learn how to do it, have some coffee afterward to talk about the experience, and just share your values. I'm not talking about preaching or being smug or superior or being argumentative or contentious, none of that. Just share your values. Just show who you are and show why it's important to you. It doesn't have to be the shooting range, it's whatever it is that you do, but shed grace. I say that all the time too. Shed grace. That if you are a sincere, committed, rational egoist, if you are in love with your life, joyously in love with your life, you should be sharing that all the time. It should emanate from you every which way. But even then, you might not be getting across to people, and so I think you should be actively cultivating them. I think you should be, I say this all the time again, evangelize egoism. I think you should be evangelizing them. And I think that the success, I hate to be a reformer, I'm not a reformer, I'm not anything, I'm not anticipating any change whatever, and yet I can see how easy it would be to make things change for the better, one mind at a time, just by picking out someone on the bubble, on the margin, not an insane social justice warrior, you will get nowhere with them, but someone who looks at your world and thinks, you know, there's some interesting stuff over there. I wonder what that's like over there. You know people like that. Befriend them. The affectionate display is everything. The aggressive display will get you nowhere. Letting everyone know that you're huffy or that you feel superior to them or that you think that your generosity marks you as a superior specimen of humanity, whatever it is that you think is going to be effective, I promise you it's not effective. But what will be effective will be the affectionate display by going out of your way to be affectionate to people and by showing them what matters in your life, by showing them your values. And guess what? If you do this right, they'll show you their values too. And an amazing miracle will happen. You will discover that you both love the same things. You go about it in different ways. You come at it from completely different directions. And you land at the same place. Because what do you love? You love your spouse. You love your children. You love your family. You love the things that you do with your time. You love your lives. And discovering, for different people to discover that they love the same things by very, very different ways is a way for them to become allies, to become friends, to become united in the defense of those values. And this is how we will grow the middle class, how we will grow the numbers, the legions of explicit, committed, rational egoists, is by evangelizing egoism. We are invited, always invited, to celebrate, honor, pay obeisance to, and especially pay bribes to alleged values that are imaginary, if not completely impossible, are very far from our day-to-day lives, are potentially infinite in number, and really cannot be ameliorated in any way at all, that everything that we are asked to do in behalf of these putative values is in fact simply an empty gesture. It doesn't amount to anything at all. The values that matter to a rational egoist are real, genuine, actual, authentic values. They are near to hand, they are not distant. They are few in number, they are not infinite. And they are imminently actionable. There are things you can do about right now. You can do something about them right now. And that's what I'm talking about. That you can't do anything to reform Islam in Paris, much less Mali. But you can take someone who has lived his whole life expecting someone or something outside of his own mind to intervene in his life and somehow make it better, and you can go to that person and you can say, there is no alternative to the existential, and accordingly, there is no alternative to exclusive self-control. Can we talk about how I affect that miracle in my own life? You don't say it in those words, but those are the words that you're actually saying. Can I show you how hard work pays off for me? Can I show you how hard work could pay off for you? Everybody wants the world to change, but nobody wants to change anything. And everybody wants everybody else to do something, but no one wants to do something in his own behalf. What you can do in your own behalf to make the world a better place now and enduringly is to live up to your own humanity and help your neighbors live up to theirs. Now that's a message for church. My name is Greg Swan. This is the Church of Splendor. I am so glad you could join me, and I'll talk to you again next week.